It's found in 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 through 4, to start with. And that reads, "When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt." Next, we'll read from chapter 20, verses 41 and 42. It says, "When the servant had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone Ezel, fell face down to the ground, and paid homage 3 times. Then he and Jonathan kissed each other and wept with each other, though David wept more. Jonathan then said to David, 'Go in the assurance the 2 of us pledged in the name of the Lord when we said, "The Lord will be a witness between you and me, between my offspring and your offspring forever." Then David left, and Jonathan went into the city." And last, we're going to read from chapter 23, verses 15 through 18. And that says, "David was in the wilderness of Ziph in Horesh when he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encouraged him in his faith in God, saying, 'Do not be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You yourself will be king over Israel, and I'll be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows it's true.' Then the 2 of them made a covenant in the Lord's presence. Afterward, David remained in Horesh while Jonathan went home."
Thanks, Ryan. Well, good morning. My name is Brian. I'm one of the pastors here at GBC. I hope you had a great new year. We are starting a new series for our new year at GBC today called Weird, where we asked you to give us some scriptures, some passages from the Bible that you found confusing or hard to understand so that we could talk about them, because that's the kind of community and atmosphere that we want to have here. You have to understand my background a little bit. I grew up in the church. Like from the day I was born, I was in the church. I was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, every single week. But what was interesting was I got into my teenage years and I decided that for the first time in my life, I was going to read through the Bible cover to cover. And I have to tell you, that was a very surprising experience for me because I was shocked. There was lots of stuff in there that no one had ever told me about. A lot of surprising stuff in there that no one had ever told me about. And even the stuff I had been told about, some of it read a little differently than what I had been told. And that's kind of my experience as a pastor with a lot of Christians. We have a discipleship environment here at GBC that we call the training program. And in part 1 of the training program, one of the things we do is we read the Bible cover to cover together. And every time, every cohort of training program 1 that I've been through, someone comes to me and says, "Brian, I didn't know that was in the Bible." Yes, it is. And what happens when you read the scriptures is inevitably it will create questions that we need to deal with. One of the questions that was submitted, here's how it was phrased. I'll tell you exactly how it went. It said, "Can you explain the relationship between Jonathan and David?" And I think you can understand why that question gets asked when you read some of the passages that we just read. And it gets ramped up a little bit more in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26, where David says this. He says, "I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were such a friend to me. Your love was more wondrous than the love of women." So in our modern context, especially with all of the things that are going on in our culture, you can all of a sudden wind up with this question that goes, what's going on between these guys? Like, is there some kind of romantic or sexual component to David's relationship? And I want you to know that when we ask questions like that, we're not trying to undermine the scriptures. We're trying to wrestle with them to understand what they actually mean. And that's the atmosphere that we want to have here. Like, I want us to be a community where we can ask whatever questions we have about Jesus and the scriptures, no matter how scandalous they might seem. And so here's what I want to do. I want to answer that question. Can we explain the relationship between David and Jonathan under 3 headings? Let's look at what their relationship wasn't, what their relationship was, and how we might have this kind of relationship today. Cool? Let's talk about David and Jonathan's relationship. Let's look at what it wasn't, what it was, and how we might build this relationship. There's a couple of things that you need to be aware of as we walk through these passages in David and Jonathan's relationship, especially what David says in 2 Samuel 1, verse 26. The first important thing to know is that the Bible explicitly prohibits same-sex sexual relationships. Everywhere that the Bible mentions physical intimacy between two people of the same sex, it is always prohibited. It is never encouraged or celebrated. That is particularly true in the first portion of the Scriptures called the Old Testament, where David and Jonathan's story is contained. There are numerous examples in the Old Testament where any kind of physical intimacy between two people of the same sex is prohibited, always. And what's really interesting is that when you read David's story in particular, the Bible is not afraid to hide his failings, including his sexual failings. And what's interesting is that all of his failings in that area of his life are exclusively heterosexual. He marries multiple women, which causes all kinds of problems. We're going to talk about that whole polygamy thing later on in this series. In fact, David's biggest fall moment, the biggest sin of his life, comes from a lust-filled pursuit of a married woman named Bathsheba, who he ultimately sleeps with. And so you have this reality where David and Jonathan have this relationship, but the Bible doesn't hide David's sin in that area of his life. And so if there was something going on romantically between David and Jonathan, it would actually be pretty striking or inconsistent for the Scriptures to be silent on it. You add to that the fact that there are zero ancient Jewish or Christian interpreters there are zero of them who see anything romantic going on between David and Jonathan. Their relationship is always interpreted as an example of righteous friendship. You can really see this in how David talks about Jonathan in that verse we read in 2 Samuel 1, verse 26. What's interesting about that verse is you got to know that the Old Testament wasn't originally written in English. It was originally written in ancient Hebrew. And in biblical Hebrew, there are several words that mean love. We've got one in the English language, love, but there are several in the Hebrew Bible that mean love. And there is one word in the Hebrew Bible that is exclusively used to talk about romantic or erotic love, and it's not the word that David uses. In fact, that word is never used about David and Jonathan's relationship. The word that David uses in 2 Samuel 1:26 is the most generic word for love that's used in the Hebrew Bible. And so, yes, it's a word that can be used to talk about love between a man and a woman. It can be used to talk about romantic love, but it's also a word that talks about familial love between brothers and sisters and parents and kids. It's a word that talks about spiritual love between God and His people. And it's even a word that talks about love between friends. And David uses that most generic word that he possibly can. And so what's happening in 2 Samuel 1:26 is that we are being given permission to grieve deeply and to love people deeply without collapsing that into a sexual relationship. Because you got to remember that verse is in a funeral lament. It's basically a eulogy that David is giving about Jonathan's dad Saul and Jonathan his friend. Notice he calls Jonathan his friend and his brother in the text, not his lover. And so what I'm trying to get across to you right now is really simply this. If the Scriptures wanted us to see anything romantic or sexual between David and Jonathan, the Scriptures had the language and the courage to say it, but it doesn't. Their relationship was not romantic in any way, shape, or form. Now, what you might be looking at me and thinking to yourself is, okay, then what was it? Because that relationship, it's emotionally intense. And the Bible doesn't apologize for that emotional intensity at all in David and Jonathan's relationship. But language to describe their relationship that's much better than romantic language would be covenantal language. Now, we We don't have much of a covenantal category in our culture right now. The only one that we have remotely left is marriage, and even that one's been undermined like crazy. So let's talk about what we mean. Let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. It says, "When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself." A covenant was a binding commitment between two people that involved sacrifice, it involved loyalty, and it involved surrender and protection of each other. And covenants in David and Jonathan's day were made between all kinds of people. Parents made covenants with their kids, siblings made covenants, kings and vassals made covenants, even God made covenants with other people. And so what happens here is that David and Jonathan develop such a deep relationship between each other that they make a covenant with one another. And the best way that I can, forgive me for what I'm about to do, the best way that I can describe this to you in our modern Western context is basically David and Jonathan said, "You're my ride or die. Forgive me." Like, "You're my BFF. Forgive me for that one too." Like that's essentially what David and Jonathan are saying here. They're saying, "I'm committed to you." And what I want you to know is that the Scriptures give us examples of this kind of committed friendship between people of the same sex all throughout it. I could tell you the story of Ruth and Naomi, who are so committed to one another that Ruth refuses to leave Naomi's side, even though she could have and probably should have. I could tell you the story about the relationship between the Apostle Paul and Timothy, who the Apostle Paul at one point calls Timothy his very heart. Like, you can see how deep their personal relationship is in the two personal letters we have of Paul to Timothy in the second portion of the Scriptures called the New Testament. Even Jesus, in one of the accounts of his life, has a friend that was simply known as the disciple that he loved. The Bible affirms this profound sense of friendship without collapsing it into sexual categories. And so what we're seeing here between David and Jonathan was an extremely deep and intimate friendship. A kind of deep and intimate friendship that I don't know that we have room for in our current modern context, which is why this conversation matters. Because I understand some of you might be thinking, okay, if we've established what this relationship wasn't, then what's the point of continuing to talk about it unless we're going to talk more about the Christian sexual ethic? And I would say to you that the point of this is because when we read Scripture, it doesn't just shape our understanding of who God is, it shapes the kind of community that we're going to become. And we live in a cultural moment that has so cheapened relationships that we've basically said that this level of intimacy and depth in relationship isn't possible without there being a romantic component. We have looked at things like celibacy and singleness and turned them into a burden or a curse rather than a gift from God and a calling. I mean, think about it. The fact that we read a story like David and Jonathan in our modern context and we say there must have been something more there than just friendship shows you the lack of depth that we believe is possible to build into a relationship like that. And it's a problem. It's a problem because when we treat friendship this way, what we wind up doing is we wind up cheapening friendship. We look at friendship as a second-rate relationship that isn't going to bring you all of the satisfaction that a romantic relationship can bring. When the Scriptures don't do that, like I'm telling you, you read the Scriptures cover to cover, you're going to notice that friendship is a primary relationship. It's not secondary. And so it's problematic because we cheapen friendship. It's also problematic because we isolate people emotionally. Where what our culture winds up saying, and even us in the church, if we're not careful, what we wind up doing is we wind up looking at singles or divorced or widowed/widowers in our context, and we say, I'm sorry, you just can't experience the greatest depth of human relationship unless you get married. We wind up making people feel like there's this level of relationship they can't have, when I would argue that in the body of Christ, in the church, there isn't supposed to be anyone second class relationally. And so we isolate people emotionally, and then when we diminish friendship the way that we have in our current context, we place a weight on romance that it was never meant to bear. Where we look at romance and we say that this romantic relationship that I need to find with someone else, it's going to give me emotional fulfillment. It's going to give me spiritual meaning. It's going to give me purpose. It's going to give me all of my hearts and my dreams. And there is no single human relationship that can bear under the weight of that. So that if you lose a romantic relationship, your life completely falls apart. Nothing is meant to bear under the weight of that. Because here's the thing. What I have learned personally, not just from the Scriptures, but seeing how the Scriptures work in my own experience in life is this. Healthy romantic relationships are built on the foundation of friendships. Healthy romantic relationships are built on the foundation of friendships. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, I will tell you this. My wife is my best friend. And I'm not just saying that because it's cute or it's cliche or because I'm getting ready for February 14th, because I don't know if you all noticed, January 2nd hit and all of a sudden there's no more red and green in Meijer. It's just pink everywhere because Valentine's Day is coming, right? I'm not trying to write you all a Hallmark card right now. And I'm not saying it to earn points because my wife is going to listen to this later. I kid you not. My wife is my best friend. But she's not my only friend. You see, one of the reasons my wife and I's marriage is as healthy as it is not just because we're best friends, it's because she's not my only friend. Because when, not if, friends, when my wife and I's relationship gets a little rocky, when we can't stand to be in the same room, let alone the same house as each other, I need other friendships. I need other people who are going to support me, who are going to encourage me, and I need people who are going to challenge me. I need people when I'm complaining to them about how ridiculous my wife is being, I need them to look at me and say, bro, maybe you should think about how ridiculous you're being. The health of my marriage is based on the fact that my wife and I are friends, and we both have other friends supporting us in our relationship. And that's the biblical vision. The Scriptures offer us a community shaped by faithful friendships, shared lives, and love that does not have to become sexual in order to be real. In a culture where people, and I would say particularly men, brothers, listen to me, in a culture where people, particularly men, struggle to develop deep friendships, the Bible puts one in front of us and says it's good. So let's pause for a second. Let me ask you something. Do you have a friend or friends in your life like David or Jonathan? Are you a friend to someone else in your life like David and Jonathan? Now, okay, how do we do that? How do you become a friend like David and Jonathan were to each other? And I think David and Jonathan teach us 4 ways that we can do that: commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and sacrifice. If you want to build the kind of friendship that David and Jonathan had into your life, you are going to build it based on commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and sacrifice. Let's just walk through those 4 things. Let's start with the idea of commitment. Remember what we read in verses 1 through 3, where David and Jonathan made a covenant with one another. Covenant relationships were a relationship built on commitment. A covenant was a relationship that said, I am committed to you whether you're committed to me or not. Essentially, when you got into a covenant relationship with someone else, you said to them, I will be for you what I'm promising to be, whether you hold up your end of the bargain or not. And that kind of relationship is the opposite of how we're being told we should function in our relationships today. If you pay close attention, it doesn't take much, but if you pay close attention, you will realize that every day you are being told that you should only be committed to someone else to the extent that they are committed to you and benefit you. Every day we are being told that your commitment level to someone else in your life should never exceed their level of commitment to you and the benefit they are bringing you in your life. So here's what it looks like. How many of you have one of these in your home? Wow, there are 0 hands that went up. I'm concerned. Okay, good. I think we all have one of these in our home. How committed are you to this? How committed are you to your toothbrush? I mean, I'm hearing a lot of muttering. I'm really interested what's going on, but track with me, okay? You're committed to this as long as it works, right? But when those bristles start to get a little too jacked up, when it doesn't leave your mouth leaving as clean as it used to, maybe it's been on the counter for one too many toilet flushes in the bathroom, what do you do? What do you do? You throw it away and you get yourself a new one, right? Since when did people become toothbrushes? I know it's a bit comical, but it's also tragic. Because that's what we're being told every single day. Be committed to someone else as long as they're committed to you, as long as they benefit you. But the moment they don't, throw them away and get yourself somebody different. You can't build friendships that way. It's killing us. Because we can never open up. We can never be vulnerable. We always have to self-protect. We can't build trust with one another. If you want a true friendship, you need a level of commitment that says, I'm committed to you whether you're committed to me or not. I'm committed to you and what Jesus wants for your life, even when it gets hard, even when I'm not benefiting from that. And so, what you might be expecting me to do, because we live in Western self-help culture, is you might be expecting me to ask you, do you got yourself a friend who's committed to you like that? No, I want to flip that because it's more important. You will not find a friend like that unless you're willing to be a friend like that. Is there a friend in your life that you are willing to be that committed to? Is there someone that you are willing to be so committed to that you're saying, whether you're committed to me or not, I'm here? Whether you're being a jerk or not, I'm here. Whether it benefits me or not, I'm here, because that's the level of commitment that's required if you want this kind of friendship. And it's not just commitment, it's also faithfulness. Let's look at 1 Samuel 20, verses 41 and 42. Here's what Ryan read for us. When the servant had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone of Ezel, fell face down to the ground, and paid homage 3 times. Then he and Jonathan kissed each other and wept with each other, though David wept more. Jonathan then said to David, go in the assurance the 2 of us pledged in the name of the Lord when we said, the Lord will be a witness between you and me and between my offspring and your offspring forever. Then David left and Jonathan went into the city. This scene plays out after a long backstory where Jonathan's dad, a guy by the name of Saul, is king at the time. And Saul loses his ever-loving mind and tries to murder David. And David and Jonathan meet up, and it's interesting because there's actually this conflict between them, where they're trying to figure out whether Saul is actually trying to kill him or not. And eventually Jonathan realizes Saul is trying to kill David. And so they come together in this moment. And Jonathan looks at David and says, I don't care what my dad is doing. I will be faithful to the promises that I made to you. David and Jonathan were faithful. And what I mean by that is they came through for each other. What they said they were going to do for each other, they did. They didn't just make empty promises that they weren't going to keep, and they also weren't kind without levels of responsibility. They came through for each other. They did what was good for one another. They were dependable towards one another. And so if you want a friendship like that, that's what it has to be based on. It has to be based on a faithfulness that says we keep the promises that we make to each other. We're dependable. We come through on the things that we say. And so again, I'm not going to tell you today to go find yourself a friend that's faithful. I'm going to ask you, are you that kind of a faithful friend? Are you dependable? Are you trustworthy? Do you keep the promises that you make? Because that's what faithfulness in a good friendship looks like. There's also encouragement that's needed. 1 Samuel 23, verses 15 through 18. David was in the wilderness of Ziph in Horesh when he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encouraged him in his faith in God, saying, "Don't be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You yourself will be king over Israel, and I'll be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows it's true." Then the two of them made a covenant in the Lord's presence. Afterward, David remained in Horesh while Jonathan went home. Jonathan seeks out David in order to encourage him. Lift his spirits. Remind David that the Lord has a plan for his life, and Saul isn't going to be able to change that plan no matter how hard Saul tries. He meets with David in one of the most difficult times of his life in order to bless him. Jonathan, I love it. He has this air about him here that believes things about David that David doesn't believe about himself. That's a lot of what encouragement looks like, is being willing to believe something about someone else that they don't believe about themselves. Like, one of the biggest ways you can be an encouragement to someone is when they come to you and say, I just can't do what the Lord's asking me to do. I can't reconcile with my wife. I can't beat this sin that's in my life. You can look at them and say, well, actually you can. Like, through the Spirit, you can do all of those things that the Lord is asking you to do. Encouragement believes things about other people that they don't necessarily believe about themselves in that moment. And I just think that in our stream of Christianity in particular, for some reason we've shied away from encouragement because we think it's going to increase people's pride or something like that, when the Scriptures will have none of it. Like, the Scriptures are constantly laying before us the need for encouragement within our friendships. And so here's my challenge for you. I want you to find someone in your life this week. I want you to pick a friend, and I want you for the next 7 days, every single day, to encourage them. Send them a text message. Give them a call, whatever it looks like, and just encourage them. Remind them that the Lord is with them, that He has a plan for their life. Tell them something that you appreciate about them. Take the next 7 days, every day, to encourage one of your friends and just watch how that builds your friendship. Deep, intimate friendships are based on commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and then lastly, sacrifice. Look back at 1 Samuel 18, verse 4. Then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt. So, there are a lot of things that this could be. Let's name it for what it actually is. Jonathan is the king's son. That, like the king's firstborn son. That means that Jonathan is the heir to the throne. He's the next in line to become king when his daddy dies. Until the Lord comes up with this different plan where David gets anointed to be the next king. So all of a sudden, you've got a rival to the heir of the throne. And in the ancient Near East, when a rival to the throne showed up, somebody died. Either the heir who was supposed to get the throne or the rival, but someone got killed when a situation like this arose. Jonathan, instead of trying to kill David the way his daddy did, Jonathan sacrifices. All of the stuff that he takes off here and hands to David are all of the things that he had a right to as the heir to the throne. Jonathan sacrifices for David. He sacrifices his right to be king for David. And if you watch Jonathan all throughout his relationship with David, this is his heart. He sacrifices for David over and over again. He provides for David. He assures David. He protects David, even at great risk to himself. There's this level of sacrifice that's required for deep, intimate friendship. We cannot have true friendship with another person unless we are willing to sacrifice. Healthy relationships are not based on taking and receiving from each other. Healthy relationships are based on giving and sacrificing for the good of other people. A true, deep friendship will see you sacrifice your rights, your needs, your wants, your desires for the betterment of someone else. And so again, can I ask you, how sacrificial are you in your friendships? Do you take or do you give? Do you cling or do you let go? Do you seek to be served or to serve? Because what Jonathan and David teach us is that deep, intimate, fulfilling friendships are possible between people without collapsing them into romantic connection. However, those friendships have to be based on commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and sacrifice. And the reason that David and Jonathan teach us that, the reason this is true, is because David and Jonathan point us to the best friend who's ever existed in Jesus. And Jesus actually, he says this in John 15, verses 13 through 15. We're quoting Jesus here. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants anymore, because a servant doesn't know what his master is doing. I have called you friends because I have made known to you everything I have heard from my Father. Jesus is a lot of things. A lot of things. And one of the things that Jesus is a friend. A friend to you and I. And you want to talk about commitment? Jesus is so committed to you that when you didn't hold up your end of the bargain, like when you sinned against him and shattered the relationship with him that you were created for, Jesus still held up his end of the bargain and went to a cross to die for you so that relationship that you broke could be restored through trust in him. He's that committed to faithfulness. Jesus is completely faithful. He will keep all of the promises that he makes to you. And even as you continue to stumble as you follow after him, he's never going to leave you or forsake you. Encouragement. Jesus is one of the most encouraging dudes you'll ever meet. He's constantly encouraging. I don't understand why we keep reading Jesus as this furrow-browed, disappointed, frustrated guy. He's constantly telling people, no, I see this in you that you don't see in yourself. Great job in what you did here. In fact, I'm convinced that a lot of things we read as Jesus critiquing or being frustrated or disappointed is actually him trying to be encouraging. He's the most encouraging person that you could ever meet. And then sacrifice. Jesus took off his kingly robe, military tunic, belt, sword, and bow, so that he could put on a body to be broken and blood to be shed, so that he could lay down his life for his friends. When we receive the bread and the cup, we remember the commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and sacrifice of the greatest friend that we've ever had in our lives. So go to him now. Remind yourself of who he is. Remember the commitment, faithfulness, encouragement, and sacrifice that he's shown to you, and reflect on how much you are a friend to others, the way that Jesus has been a friend to you. Jesus, we thank you today for being a friend to us. You are many things. You are God. You are Lord. You are King. You are Creator. You're the most powerful being that exists, Lord. You are so many things, which makes it even more amazing that one of the things you're willing to be to us is that friend. Father, thank you for making it possible to be considered friends of your Son. Thank you for making it possible for us to be your sons and daughters through what you've done for us. Jesus, you have laid out for us a path towards relationship with each other that is as deep and intimate as you mean it to be. And so, Holy Spirit, we're asking that you would give us the ability to pursue that relationship with one another. Help us to be friends to others that are committed, that are faithful, encouraging, and that sacrifice for the betterment and the good of others. Would you meet us and grow our relationships into what you would have them to be? It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.